Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's close to a lot of parents' hearts. Early signs of autism in toddlers.
It's a topic that can be really difficult to get a handle on, especially when you're looking at all those medical articles.
Yeah, those can be tough to decipher. So we're going to break it all down today and give you the key takeaways.
Exactly. We want to give you the info you need to feel confident and empowered.
And just a quick reminder, this isn't about diagnosing anyone. It's about giving you the knowledge to observe your little ones and, feel comfortable seeking a professional opinion if you see anything that raises a flag.
Think of it like this. We're giving you the tools for informed observation.
So let's jump right in. We've all heard the term Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD, but what does that actually look like in toddlers?
Well, it really affects how a child interacts with the world, how they communicate, behave, and socialize.
Right, and it's called a spectrum for a reason, right? Because it presents differently in every child.
Exactly. It's unique to each child. No two are exactly alike.
Okay, so every child is different, but why is spotting these signs early so important?
Early intervention is key. Those early years are crucial for brain development.
So it's like giving them the best possible start.
Exactly. The earlier we can provide support, the better the chances are for a child to thrive.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's talk signs. The article we're looking at today highlights 5 key areas. Where do we even begin?
A lot of times it starts with those subtle differences in social interaction.
Okay, so what are we talking about specifically?
Well, take eye contact, for example. Parents might notice that their toddler doesn't quite make eye contact the way other kids do.
So it's not just about a child being shy or, distracted by a toy. There's a difference there.
Right, think about it this way. You're trying to get your toddler's attention. You call their name, and instead of looking at you, they seem to just look past you. Their gaze is fleeting. It's not really connecting.
So a lack of response to their name, even in a quiet room, could be a sign.
Yeah, especially by 12 months. Most babies at that age will turn their heads or, at least acknowledge you in some way when they hear their name.
And what about when you see a child who's kind of off in their own world? Does that fall under this social interaction category too?
It can,
Hmm.
especially if it's paired with a lack of interaction. Like if you try to engage with them and they just don't respond, they're just in their own little world.
And it can be hard to know, when is it just a child being a child and when is it something more?
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to talk to your pediatrician if you have any concerns.
Speaking of being in their own world, that makes me think of repetitive behaviors. Is that kind of related?
It definitely can be. The world can be overwhelming for a toddler, especially one who processes sensory information differently.
So these repetitive behaviors are almost like a way for them to feel more in control.
Exactly. It's like they're creating a sense of order and predictability in a world that can feel chaotic.
So things like rocking back and forth or lining up their toys, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or getting really upset if their routine changes even a little bit.
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen that with toddlers. Even those who aren't on the spectrum, routines are important.
Absolutely. But for toddlers with ASD, those disruptions to routine can be really distressing. It's not just a typical tantrum. It's a meltdown fueled by a deep need for sameness.
And I imagine this need for control can extend to their interests too.
Right. You got it.
Yeah.
You might see a toddler who's fixated on a specific toy, but not in the typical way.
So instead of, playing with a toy car by driving it around, what would that look like?
They might just spin the wheels over and over
Yeah.
again, fascinated by that one specific detail.
So it's that intense focus on a very specific thing.
Exactly. And it could be anything. Dinosaurs, trains, whatever it is. They just dive into it with an intensity that's beyond their peers.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects, but what about communication? We talked about language delays briefly earlier, but are there any other red flags parents should be watching for?
Well, by 16 months, most toddlers are starting to babble and string together sounds. If you're not seeing any of that by that age, it's definitely something to talk to your doctor about.
Can you give us an example of what that lack of communication might look like in everyday life?
Imagine a toddler who wants a cookie from the jar. They can't yet point or say cookie, so instead of communicating their need, they might just cry and get frustrated, maybe even try to pull you towards the jar.
It must be so hard for them to not be able to express what they want.
Exactly. And that frustration can lead to some challenging behaviors.
And what about repetitive speech? I remember seeing that in the article. What does that mean?
So that's when a child echoes phrases or sounds they've heard, like from TV shows or songs.
So they might just repeat something over and over again.
Right. But they're not actually using it to communicate. It's more like they're mimicking the sounds without understanding the meaning.
Okay, that makes sense. We've covered a lot of ground here. Social interaction, repetitive behaviors, communication. But there's another big piece of the puzzle that I think a lot of parents can relate to: sensory sensitivities.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that affects everyone to some extent, whether you're on the spectrum or not.
Yeah, we've all experienced that feeling of being overwhelmed by loud noises or bright lights. But for a child with ASD, it's magnified.
Exactly. Imagine if you could turn up the volume on your senses.
Hmm.
That's what it can be like for a toddler with ASD.
So how does that actually manifest? What are we looking for?
Well, picture this. You take your toddler to a birthday party. There's music, kids shouting, balloons popping. It's a sensory overload. A typical toddler might find it exciting, but a toddler with ASD might have a complete meltdown.
And that can be really tough for parents, right? Because other people might not understand what's going on.
Absolutely. They might just see a child having a tantrum and not realize that there's a sensory reason behind it.
So it's important for us to remember that there's always more going on than meets the eye.
Exactly. We need to be more understanding and compassionate.
And it's not always about being overwhelmed.
Right.
Some kids with ASD actually crave sensory input.
That's right. It can go both ways. Some kids are hypersensitive. Others are hyposensitive. It just depends on the child.
As we're talking about all of this, it's really striking me how interconnected these different areas are. Social interaction, repetitive behaviors, communication, sensory sensitivities, they all seem to influence each other in some way.
You're absolutely right. They're not separate symptoms. They're all intertwined.
It's like a puzzle where all the pieces fit together.
Exactly. And to really understand autism, we need to see the whole picture.
Okay, so let's talk about that last piece of the puzzle, the lack of imitation and play skills. Why is that so important?
Well, think about it. Imitation is how we learn. As babies, we copy the people around us.
Yeah.
That's how we learn to talk, how we learn to interact. It's all about imitation.
So if a child isn't imitating, they're missing out on a crucial part of development.
Exactly. And this can extend to pretend play, too, which is so important for social and emotional development.
Yeah, pretend play is where imagination really comes alive.
Right. And if a toddler isn't engaging in pretend play by around 18 to 24 months, that's something to pay attention to.
So all of these signs, from social interaction to play skills, they're all pieces of the puzzle. And if you're seeing several of them together, that's when you really want to talk to your doctor.
Absolutely. It's always better to err on the side of caution.
And I think it's important to reiterate, these are just potential signs, not a diagnosis. If something feels off about your child's development, trust your parental instincts.
You know your child best. And if you have concerns, don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Early intervention is key. The sooner we can provide support, the better the outcome for the child.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about what that support looks like in the next part of our deep dive.
This has been so insightful already. We've learned so much about the nuances of early autism signs. But hold on, we're not done yet. In part 2, we'll explore what parents can do if they suspect their toddler might be showing some of these signs. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back. So we've been talking about all the subtle signs of autism, and, it can be a lot to take in.
It really can be.
So let's say a parent's been watching their toddler, and some of these things are kind of ringing true. What's the next step?
Well, first of all, trust your gut. Parents know their kids better than anyone. If something feels off, it probably is.
Okay, but what do you actually do? Like, who do you talk to?
The first step is to talk to your pediatrician. They can be a great resource and help guide you through the process.
Okay, but pediatricians see so many kids. How can I make sure they really understand what I'm seeing at home?
That's where specific examples come in. Instead of just saying, my toddler doesn't make eye contact, try describing a particular situation. Like, when I call their name, they often don't react, even in a quiet room.
So it's all about the details, painting a clear picture.
Exactly. The more information you can give them, the better they can assess the situation.
And I guess it's not about self-diagnosing. It's about giving the doctor the information they need.
Right. It's about working together as a team.
So let's say the pediatrician recommends further evaluation. What happens then?
Well, they might refer you to a specialist, like a developmental pediatrician or a child psychologist.
And what can parents expect from those evaluations?
It really depends on the specialist. But generally, they'll involve a lot of observation. They'll watch how your child plays, how they interact, things like that.
So it's not just about, filling out questionnaires or anything like that.
It's much more interactive and hands-on.
Okay, let's say those evaluations confirm a diagnosis of ASD. I know that can be a really emotional time for families. What advice would you give to parents who are navigating those early days?
First of all, take a deep breath. It's okay to feel all the feels. It's a lot to process. You might feel relieved. You might feel sad. You might feel scared. All of that is normal.
It's a roller coaster of emotions, for sure.
It really is. And it's important to remember that you're not alone. There are so many resources available to help you and your child.
Can you give us some examples, like where should parents start looking for support?
Well, there are some amazing national organizations like Autism Speaks and the Autism Society of America.
And what kind of support do they offer?
They have tons of information about autism, everything from the basics to more in-depth stuff. They also have resources for finding local support groups and connecting with other families.
So it's not just about information, it's about finding community.
Exactly. It can be so helpful to connect with other parents who are going through the same thing.
And there's always the internet, right?
Oh, yeah. Online communities and forums can be a lifesaver. They can offer support, advice, even just a place to vent. It's a great way to connect with other people who get it.
Okay, so we've talked about finding support, but what about actually helping your child thrive? That's where early intervention comes in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Early intervention is crucial. It's
Yeah.
all about providing support that's tailored to your child's individual needs.
So what does that actually look like?
Well, there are a lot of different approaches. One of the most common is applied behavior analysis, or ABA.
I've heard of that. What is it exactly?
It's a very structured approach that focuses on teaching new skills and reducing challenging behaviors.
So it's very evidence-based.
Right. And then there's speech therapy, which can help with communication skills, both verbal and nonverbal.
And what about occupational therapy?
Occupational therapy is great for developing fine motor skills, sensory processing, and daily living activities.
Wow, that's a lot. How do parents even know where to start?
It can definitely feel overwhelming at first, but remember, you don't have to be an expert in everything. Your child's evaluation team will help guide you through the process.
So they'll recommend specific therapies based on your child's needs.
Exactly. It's all about creating a customized plan for your child.
And these interventions can really make a difference.
They absolutely can. Research has shown that early intervention can significantly improve outcomes for children with autism.
That's so encouraging to hear. But even with all the right resources in place, a diagnosis of autism can still feel really daunting. There's a lot of talk about acceptance, but what does that actually look like in everyday life?
That's a great question. And it's something that I think a lot of parents struggle with. Acceptance isn't about pretending that autism doesn't exist.
It's about more than just, tolerating it.
Right. It's about acknowledging it as part of who your child is.
And I think it's about shifting your focus, right? Instead of trying to fix your child, it's about understanding and embracing their unique way of experiencing the world.
Exactly. It's about celebrating neurodiversity,
Yeah,
not trying to erase it.
I love that. It's about creating an environment where your child feels loved and valued and supported just for being themselves.
Absolutely. And that's so important
Mm,
because when a child feels loved and accepted, they can really thrive.
so true. You know, we've been talking a lot about individual acceptance, but I think it's important to remember that this is a societal issue too.
Oh, absolutely. We need to change the way our society views autism.
It's about more than just awareness.
Right. It's about creating a world where neurodiversity is not just tolerated, but truly celebrated.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin? So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think it starts with education. We need to break down those stereotypes and misconceptions that surround autism.
So a lot of the fear comes from just not knowing, right?
Exactly. People see a child having a meltdown and they don't understand what's going on.
They might make judgments without realizing that, the child is experiencing sensory overload.
Right. So education is key. We need to talk about autism openly and honestly. Share stories. Challenge those harmful stereotypes.
And it's important to remember that autism is a spectrum.
Right.
There's so much diversity within the autistic community.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all description of autism. We need to celebrate those differences. Recognize the strengths and talents that autistic individuals bring to the table.
I love the term neurodiversity. It's about embracing the idea that different brains work in different ways, and that's okay.
It's more than, okay, it's essential. Neurodiversity is what makes our world so rich and vibrant. Think about all the incredible contributions that autistic individuals have made in science, technology, art, music. We need to create a society that values those differences.
So it's not just about acceptance, it's about creating opportunities for everyone to contribute their unique talents and perspectives.
Exactly. And that goes beyond just individual attitudes. We need systemic change as well. We need policies and programs that support autistic individuals and their families.
So it's about creating a world where everyone feels seen and heard and valued, no matter how their brain is wired.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of inclusion comes in. It's not enough to just say, we accept you. We need to create spaces where autistic individuals feel welcome, where their needs are met, and where they can fully participate in all aspects of society.
That's a powerful vision, but it takes a collective effort to make it a reality.
It absolutely
Yeah.
does. It requires all of us to step up, challenge our own biases, and advocate for change.
So it's about ongoing education, challenging our assumptions, and being willing to learn and adapt.
Precisely. Creating a truly inclusive world for autistic individuals is an ongoing journey, not a destination. It requires us to constantly reflect, adjust, and strive for better.
And I think it's important to remember that this journey benefits everyone. When we create a world that's more inclusive and accepting of neurodiversity, we create a world that's richer and more vibrant and more compassionate for all of us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think we've covered an incredible amount of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the early signs of autism, the importance of early intervention, the power of acceptance, and the vision of a more inclusive world. And as always, there's so much more to learn and explore.
Indeed. But if there's one takeaway I hope you'll leave with, it's this. Every individual, regardless of their neurotype, deserves to be celebrated for who they are. Let's all do our part to create a world where that's not just a vision, but a reality.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring this topic with you. We'll see you next time for another insightful journey into the world of knowledge and discovery.